Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me one of the most legendary founders from the country. Thank you so much, Beerud, for joining me. Beerud is the co-founder and CEO of Gupshup, which is a conversational messaging platform, and I'm absolutely honored to have you today.
Hey, Jivraj, thanks for having me here.
Great to hear that, Beerud. And as we go ahead with the discussion, I want to dive deeper into so many of the intricate aspects of your 20 plus years of being a founder. But before we dive deeper into rabbit holes, I want to start with an abstract note, which is staying ahead of the curve. So one thing that was very fascinating to note through the research when I was going up leading up to the episode was that every time with all of your ventures, you've been ahead of the curve, be it with Elance when you thought about a gig marketplace, a marketplace for the gig economy, which was way ahead of its time, or when you talk about Gupshup and conversational messaging, and when you talk about, how messaging is going to change in the future. So if you can talk us through a part of your journey and also how important this aspect has been and what you would recommend young founders to do in order to stay ahead of the curve, I think that'd be a great start to this wonderful conversation.
Sure. Actually, in some ways, look, it's a lot easier than you think it is. Basically, when something changes, when there's a huge disruption or a paradigm shift, okay, something that is dramatic and significant, it will have a lot of consequences, right? And if you just sort of stop to think about what will change as a consequence of this giant change, I think that already gives you a peek into the future. And then if you start working on it quickly, by definition, you're ahead of the curve. Now, it may still take some time for the market to be ready to adopt whatever it is you're building, but almost always, right? Great Silicon Valley ideas or startup ideas, tech startup ideas have been built on the backs of some sort of dramatic paradigm shift, right? So for example, when the internet happened, right? You needed you needed a place that could organize all the websites so you can find what you're looking for, and it was a portal called Yahoo first, and a search engine called Google. You needed a browser to go visit all those websites, so Netscape, and then other things were huge. I think, and people wanted to see video, so at some point YouTube kind of, when the bandwidth got high enough to be able to do streaming video, that was the tipping point for YouTube to take off, right? And then later on, people want to keep in touch with each other, so social media and so on. I think in our case, same thing. I think in that early days of the internet connecting far-flung people and being able to transact with each other, most of the people were focusing on transaction of goods. We said transaction of services would be possible, so that's how Elance came about. And then Gupshup, sort of came about just by looking at the rise of mobile phones. There was a point in in the mid 2000s roughly, where mobile phones started picking up globally, and initially it was feature phones, later it was smartphones. But suddenly, when you have 5-7 billion users for the first time now having a new device, well, that's a giant technological shift that you can take advantage of. And then on and on, right? I think the same thing even in India, right? When like Geo democratized access to broadband, suddenly that opens up a lot of new possibilities that were not possible before, and so on. So we can go into that, but I think the short idea is, when there's some giant sort of paradigm shift happens, it opens up a lot of new opportunities that that if you jump onto it quickly enough will help you be ahead of the curve.
Fair enough. So, no, riding on the wave is the cue, and being cognizant of how it's going to play out, and maybe predicting, if not predicting, at least trying to see where it goes and then riding it is my cue from that. But as we talk about that, a good segue would be to understand more about market timing, right? Sometimes you can do things that may be ahead of its time, which might have been the case in terms of Elance, right, if you can call it that. And there must have been multiple other cycles also that you've seen where things have come and gone, and they're not essentially stick, and it's not always the first mover that might essentially win, right? So when we talk about market timing, especially given that it's an uncontrollable for a founder, how do you deal with external factors, and how do you go about that in any particular ecosystem? That'd be interesting to gauge.
Yeah, I think Absolutely right. Right. So you can spot a wave coming and try to ride it, but sometimes the wave can take a lot longer than you anticipated, which means then you need runway, you need funding to survive that long.
Yeah.
Or you thought that maybe the consumer side will jump to it, but the enterprise side moves faster, or vice versa, right? So it's not enough to just sort of have a broad space. Within that broad space, you still have to have a specific target audience, a specific product, a specific sort of business model,
Yeah.
and sort of the funding based on sort of those things. And you need to have a specific team that's optimized to all of these things, right? And what can happen is some of those things, some of your assumptions may not hold out exactly as you thought they would, right? And therefore you might need to sort of refine the target audience, refine the product, refine the team, and so on, right? So I think yeah, you need, I mean, this really, I mean, ultimately there's no nobody knows the exact future, right? Which is why entrepreneurs, I mean, some of it is you think through it, you develop your strategy based on certain assumptions, and you have to constantly keep validating if those assumptions still hold. And if you get feedback from the market that either the customer doesn't like it, or they like it but they're not willing to pay for it, or they're willing to pay for it but but your execution is not scaling,
Yeah.
and so on, those are the times where you sort of need to really course correct, right? And that's what we call a pivot. You need to change one or more of these things, and certainly in my experience we've had to, I think both at Elance or Upwork now at Gupshup, we've had to execute these sort of pivots, I think from, in both cases actually, from consumer to an enterprise business model. And also so the target audience changed, therefore the product changed, and the business model also changed, right? And then the team also had to change over time. So each of these things, I mean, yeah, you need to be constantly, I mean, so see, the life of an entrepreneur is a bit of like paranoia, right? I mean, I'm always, I mean, as Andy Grove famously wrote this book called Only the Paranoid Survive. I mean, you kind of have to be constantly thinking about, okay, what am I missing? What am I not thinking about? What am I not aware about, right? What are the trends that are changing? And the tech industry is always so dynamic, and you kind of have to be on top of things and be aware of it. And the moment you get arrogant or you think you know everything, I mean, that's when so you have to approach this whole exercise with a lot of intellectual humility, saying your track record doesn't matter. In the moment, right here, right now, with this product, with this customer, and with this team, what can you really build? And if any of those assumptions change, then you have to say, okay, I was wrong. And it's not like success or failure. It just means that you had this assumption, and that didn't bear out, and you need to change something.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? So I think in that sense, good entrepreneurs are always very, very flexible, very nimble. Whatever's working, you double down on it, scale it up. If it's not working, you sort of adjust it, refine it, and refocus it. And and that's a constant exercise, right? Some pivots are very big pivots, but in some sense, there are mini or micro pivots you're fine tuning literally every day, right? You might say, okay, this customer, let's not focus on this customer, let's focus on this one instead, or let's add this feature instead of feature A versus feature B, or let's price it, change the pricing model or things like that. So you're always tweaking, refining, adjusting so that you have the right product for the right customer with the right business model and the right team to execute on it.
That's wonderful. Exactly. I think, intellectual humility and flexibility, as you mentioned. But, Beerud, if we can just double click on the pivots once, because in hindsight, I'm sure, it's easy to calculate backwards. And as Steve Jobs has mentioned, connect the dots. But in the moment when you're taking some of these difficult decisions, right? Because again, how actionable it might be or how it's going to play out is only as questionable as the future. But when you were doing, let's say, the pivot for Gupshup, right? How was it, and what did you think through? And what would you suggest founders do? Like being married to the problem and thinking problem first. All of these are solutions that have been out there in the open. But from your personal experience, what are things that played in your favor, and how did you have the conviction to go ahead and pivot? I think that would be really interesting to understand better.
Yeah, I think maybe the hardest thing in this whole thing is just the founder psychology, right? Just your personal self.
Yeah.
Which is, if you get married to an idea, or if your ego gets attached to that thing, or you're worried about what will other people think, where until yesterday you were telling them we're going to go right, and now suddenly you're going to say we're going to go left, right? What will everybody think of you? What will your investors think of you? And so on. And these are all, I think, often, rookie entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs often sort of make these mistakes, because all of these things, they kind of cloud decision making, I think. Really, like I said, there is, an entrepreneurial journey is going to have a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges, and there's no failure. You really just have to approach with, look, nobody has done this. I mean, if there was a path to follow, then many people would have executed it. But by definition, usually with innovative companies, you're doing things that nobody's ever done before. And if nobody's done before, there's no shame in saying, okay, I thought this would work, it didn't work, okay, what am I going to do next? Right? So really, I think it just you kind of have to take a analytical problem solving mindset, the growth mindset, as they call it, and an entrepreneurial approach. Okay, if this didn't work, could I try something else? Could I tweak it, modify it, and so on, right? It's not like it's all or nothing, success or failure. What you're really trying to say is what worked, what didn't work. And that applies even on a day-to-day basis, even to the product features you're building, even to customers you're selling to, just as it does to the overall company strategy, right? So I think it's maybe the best analogy is, look, when you're driving a car, right? It's you can't say I'm going to put it in autopilot and it's going to go to the destination. I mean, we still don't have that software. I mean, the way we drive a car is, sometimes you go a little to the right, a little to the left, you're course correcting every step of the way. Sometimes you speed up, sometimes you're braking down, you're braking and slowing down. I think, and all of it is, just exercising judgment and course correction. And if your ego gets in the way, saying, no, I just want to go right, doesn't matter if the road is turning left, I mean, what will happen then, right? So I think it's the same thing. Or if you don't slow down on a curve, because you can't see far enough ahead, again, that can cause problems. So it's really, I think you just have to, you're in the driver's seat. You can't, you just have to say, okay, how do I get to where I want to go? And what's the best and the easiest and the lowest risk way of getting there?
Absolutely. Wow. No, that's amazing to hear, and love the car analogy. I think the only difference there would be it's just driving a car on a mountain hill as opposed to the normal roads given the founder journey. But wonderful to hear that. Thanks for that, Beerud. As we move on to, I think I want to now focus a chunk of the conversation on how you're building Gupshup. But before we go there, it'll be very interesting to understand what your observations from building in the Valley have been, right? Because you've seen the Valley shape up in the last 2 decades like no other. There have been multiple multi-generational companies born in this time period that you've seen born, establish, and also now conquer, right? So if you can just talk to us about what that ecosystem has meant for you, how it's helped you become the entrepreneur that you are today, and also maybe talk us through what you're seeing in the India happening right now, given that we're at an inflection point where we're seeing multiple companies really thrive out of India, and amazing innovation coming through, which is also the theme of the podcast, where I'm calling it Indian Silicon Valley. So if you can give us that entire learnings, your set of learnings from the last decade or two, that'd be wonderful to hear.
I think what's unique about the Valley, right, is just it's sort of in the air, right, which is you have a lot of people with a lot of shared experience, a lot of experiences from trying new things. And through those, battle scars and the experiences that the learnings that they've acquired, they're very willing to share and share each other. And there's a very high density of people with a lot of insights, right? And that really matters, right? Because again, it's sort of in an innovative business, right? It's nobody's done it. Everybody's trying to figure it out. So it's not like you have a clear path. To use another analogy, you're trying to sort of climb a mountain at night, complete dark. You can't see anything. And all you can do is feel. And, so what you do is you maybe take a step in the right direction, step this side, another step the other way. And whichever is sort of moving up, you say, okay, this seems to be getting, moving uphill. And therefore I should kind of go that way. And then to speed it up, you get 10 of your friends and say, okay, every one of you try to take a step and then tell me which one is the right or the wrong one, right? So in this sort of scenario, I mean, nobody has full visibility. And the only thing you have are just sort of rules of thumb and, principles and guiding instincts and so on, right? And that really determines everything in terms of best practices and so on, right? And especially a lot of these insights are very counterintuitive, which is to say, give away your product for free, and then the real value is not in the product, but in the data you collect, or which you can use for advertising, like social media companies do, or search engine companies do, right? Or even in enterprise software, people have done it, right? So sort of this sort of weird pricing, or network effects, or platform thinking, or lean methodology for figuring out what the right feature should be, right? And these things become, or blitz scaling. I mean, these are all sort of different approaches. This is sort of the entrepreneurial toolkit, right? And you have a lot of people here that have tried different tools and figured out, oh, this tool is right for this situation under that circumstance and this market, and and for that you need this kind of team. So all of these sort of combinatorial, all these combinations and permutations have been tried, and people have sort of developed these guiding principles that actually help companies grow faster. And when it's working, how to scale up. When it's not working, how to turn around, how to fix it, how to modify it, how to get a lot of capital, all the relationships, insights, and so on. So I think that's special about the Valley, right? And I think India, I'm very optimistic. It still has some way to go there, right? The density of entrepreneurs, of experienced entrepreneurs, of second, third generation entrepreneurs, and so on, is very, very low, right? I mean, we barely had, one generation of successful entrepreneurs, let alone, second and third, and even that number is very, very small. So I think, but I'm very optimistic. I mean, look at the number of unicorns that have been funded. Look at the number of companies that are getting out there, and India has scale, so I'm confident it'll get there. But it takes some of that just takes time, and it takes maturity and sort of experience. Now, fortunately, the good thing is, India and Silicon Valley are very tightly connected at the hip. I mean, and then of course, with these tools, right, Zoom and so on, it makes it a lot easier with blogs and podcasts and so on. So everybody can have access to the same data, and there's a lot of conversations, one-on-one conversations, customized conversations also happening in at a very high scale. So I think it's all these gaps can be bridged, right? You don't need the entrepreneur physically in India if you can talk to somebody in the Valley and just tap into the same knowledge. So I think and that's happening, right? So that gives me sort of cause for opportunity. Plus, of course, India has it's a growth market, right? I mean, there's such the baseline of tech is so low compared to the US that in that sense, there's many, many more growth opportunities. So you combine this sort of, Valley know-how along with the Indian growth market, I think there's a ton of opportunities. And that's where, in a way, Gupshup sort of sits at that intersection, right? I mean, I'm here right now talking to you from Silicon Valley while, the bulk of our business is in India. But I do think that, I think that allows us to do the best of both worlds, right? Which is really bring in disruptive, innovative, unique sort of thinking and, apply it in the high growth Indian market.
Absolutely. No, I love that. From what I can observe, it's more about, the air of the ecosystem and the shared sort of experiences that exist, which India is catching up with. But it's great to see that, if there is one advantage of what has been a terrible crisis, it's that the world has truly flattened. And so resource and, people connecting with each other is not at all an issue. And this conversation in itself is a testament to it. So wonderful to hear that. As we move forward, right, Gupshup is really driving the future of conversational messaging. I would love to firstly understand how the product has evolved. So post the pivot into enterprise and driving conversational messaging for enterprises, how has the multiple versions of the product essentially evolved? Because there have been multiple things being done to date, and innovation is at the core of what you're building, right? So if you can walk us through that journey of product building over the last decade, I think that'd be very interesting to gauge from a founder lens.
Sure. I think, so over the last decade, I mean, look, when Gupshup got started, we sort of focused on, like I said, a mobile phone. The mobile revolution was just happening. Mostly feature phones at that time in India, right? So we said, now if you want to build a service that reaches hundreds of millions of people, the only way to do it was through SMS, right? Because SMS was the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And initially we had a consumer focused service, which what was called at that time SMS Gupshup. And these were sort of networks of publishers and subscribers. But anyway, it grew very popular, but we couldn't afford to subsidize it or to monetize it. So then we pivoted, right? That was the first pivot. And we said, okay, SMS is great, engagement is great, but we'll sell it to enterprises who can afford to pay for it, right? So we took the best part of our platform, which was the scale and the engagement tools, and sort of pivoted the business model to enterprise. And then since then we've sort of building out the platform, scaling out the platform, and then along the way a lot of interesting things have happened, right? I mean, we are at Gupshup, we pride ourselves on pushing the limits of messaging technology, trying out different things, new things, and so on, right? So for example, with SMS, the basic sort of messaging is you get these notifications today on your device, right? Which is your e-commerce company says your order is confirmed, your package is shipped, your food is arriving, or you used your credit card to spend 100 rupees at the cafe, and so on, right? These are the basic kind of messages. But since then, now you have other channels that are emerging, right? You can send a message on WhatsApp, you can send a message on Instagram, you can send, and Gupshup has launched something called GIP. So you can send these messages through the other channels. And more importantly, the consumer can now reply, right? Which means now you can have a two-way conversation between a business and the consumer. So that's creating this whole new opportunity of conversational experiences, right? People are creating chatbots. I mean, enterprises are creating chatbots to automate this two-way conversation with customers. So I think, so the way Gupshup product has evolved is initially we were just providing SMS APIs, and then we added more channels, right? There's like 30 plus channels that we offer. And then as the channels grew and became richer, we now have conversational tools, which is the next layer of the stack, right? Additional tools to automate these things. And then even above that, there's conversational AI, right? Which allow you to have unstructured natural language conversations, imagine like Amazon Alexa or something, right? So you can have these sort of discussion with any brand or business. And I think of late, we've seen an explosion of interest from enterprises. We think virtually every business is going to have to build these conversation experiences, right? So the market opportunity has just expanded dramatically, and we're building out all these tools, right? Again, to use an analogy, it's a little bit like the web, right? In the mid 90s, when the web came about, every business had to build a website because that was the digital storefront. That's where people would come in from and look for businesses. Today, consumers use messaging apps, right? And that's where they want to interact with businesses. So now these conversational experiences are the new digital storefront. That's where the customers are. That's where they're looking for businesses. And therefore, every business is going to have to build this. Every restaurant, every retailer, every bank and airline and so on. So we think there's a huge opportunity to really enable this vision. And once it's achieved, it's great for consumers too, because now they can get one-click instant responses 24/7 from any business or brand, rather than calling to the call center during office hours and staying on hold for a long time, right? So, or being able to transact quickly or to check balances and things like that. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and our product is sort of constantly evolving to get richer and offer more capabilities, and sort of provide this whole infrastructure to businesses that want to build chatbots and conversation experiences and use messaging APIs.
Wow, no, phenomenal to hear that. And I was, pleasantly surprised to know that the OnePlus messaging experience, which is phenomenal, is powered by Gupshup. So phenomenal work there. And evidently it makes the life of consumers and enterprises, I'm guessing, much, much easier and much, much faster. I love the analogy of the Web 2.0 as well. But as we talk about that, right, for instance, a OnePlus partnership and the multiple wonderful enterprises that you have on board from across the world now, can you perhaps talk to us about how has enterprise sales evolved for Gupshup, right? And your interest in enterprise and experience has been far and long. So if you can talk to us about, and perhaps gauge, because there are a bunch of founders of building in the enterprise world, and we've always heard how important sales is as a factor, right? How important sales can be for a founder alone to find those clients early on, and as you scale. So perhaps if you can tell us what the secret has been for Gupshup to power almost last I saw 6 billion plus messages, and those numbers which are staggering. It'll be great to hear that.
Sure, absolutely, right. I mean, first and foremost, look, the secret to great sales is to have a great product, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, that's a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm.
And then the secret to having a great product is to have sort of a great vision, right? Of what is it that you want to build that customers will love. So if you start with the right thing, like I described earlier, our vision for conversational messaging, right, which we've seen a lot of interest in, and then we build out the product with all of these capabilities that customers need, and also spend time on making it, sort of automated, self-serve, easy to use, easy to try, easy to customize, easy to maintain, easy to support, right? If all of that thinking has gone into the product already, then that makes the sales process or the marketing and sales process a lot easier, right? So because then when the sales team is talking to the customer, firstly, you can bring new and innovative ideas, which now Gupshup has a reputation for being, maybe the most innovative player in the space in bringing out these new ideas. And secondly, the products that we sell, they're good quality. The platform, the infrastructure is very stable and reliable. They are easy to try. We also like to think Gupshup is a very easy to work with, which means our pricing is very transparent. Our the pricing model is very straightforward. It's usually pay as you go, right? So you don't have to worry about making a huge commitment up front and then worrying about whether it'll be worth it or not. You just sort of get started, start using it, right? And we have good APIs with good documentation, with a lot of tutorials, and then we host a lot of webinars, and we do a lot of evangelism. We provide good support, right? So every aspect of that thing is, once that's taken care of, that makes really the salesperson's life a lot easier, right? And then of course on the sales side, you want to bring in people who are experts in the domain or in the sales process, and they understand how to evangelize new products, right? Because selling commodity products is very different from selling sort of brand new products. You really have to explain, educate, evangelize, and then convert a customer. So hiring the right kind of people is critical. Having the right incentives in the system, right, to avoid any conflicts and to prioritize certain products over other products and so on. All of these things are important. So yeah, I mean, that's been the sales strategy, and now we are expanding to internationally. We are sort of in a dozen plus countries and scaling very rapidly around the world. So all of that comes into play to drive sort of market success. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, and that's evident. No, it's been amazing to see the growth. And as you've, mentioned in the past as well, you're looking at expanding in LATAM, in other geographies as well. And so that's great to see. And especially the evangelism perspective as well. But, if we can double click on the global expansion, as consumers differ or there are diverse cultures that come into the picture, how do you transfer one playbook to the other? And is it as simple as ensuring that the top of the funnel is simplified, because eventually in the micro level it'll be repeatable playbooks, or are there more nuances that go into global footprint expansion? That would be very, very fascinating to just understand.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, right? So like I mentioned earlier, you want your product to be customizable and flexible. You want it, internationalization. IIT then has to be ready,
Mhm.
uh, because you need to offer it in the local language. You need to hire people locally, right? Both for evangelism and for customer support. So
Mhm.
even if product and engineering could be in one place, right? But some factors have to be local, and so
Right.
on. So I think we do that. We hire local teams, but relatively light or small teams, because the product is self-serve and automated and easy to use, and so on, right? So, and we leverage marketing as well a lot, right? So then that allows you to scale to more countries faster and easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think and then, like I said, you make your product customizable enough so that when you get differing requirements, right, there are different currencies and different payment systems, and different messaging requirements in different languages, and so on. So I think there are enough differences that you have to be able to customize to.
Mhm.
But at the same time, right, you should select the spaces you're going after where there's enough commonality that you're not building the product 10 times over, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so what I would say is 80% of it should be the same, right? And maybe as 20% unique differences that you can localize, right? But if you don't have that, I think then you're literally trying to run 10 companies,
Yeah.
right? So I think you want to be a little careful with that. But so long as that's not the case, if you can, there's enough commonality.
Right.
The other things you can very carefully and cleverly sort of customize for.
Awesome. Great, great. Wonderful to hear that. Further, this is one question that I ask almost all founders that have been on the show. And this is regarding culture and hiring, right? And with your experience, Beirut, it would be very, very fascinating to know how you have probably looked at culture building, organizational building as you moved ahead. Because when it's all about the people building the phenomenal product and driving everything that happens on the forefront, how do you essentially build people is a mystery that lies ahead for every founder who's looking to start or is just starting out, right? So any pearls of wisdom there would be very helpful.
Sure. I think when you're building innovative companies, I think perhaps the core aspect of it is you need an entrepreneurial culture, right? And what I mean by that is, uh, an organization that is nimble and flexible in terms of, uncovering opportunities, doing trial and error, being able to course correct and adjust as you get new data and you discover new things and so on. But that's hard to do in a large organization, right? So therefore the organization also has to be somewhat apolitical, right? Because you can't it's not about personalities and egos. It's about what's the right thing for the company and what do we need to do. And if all decisions sort of flow from that, then good, it leads to good outcomes and good decisions, right? So I think um, being very entrepreneurial, also very open and transparent, right? I mean, especially in India, you have a lot of kids coming out of school, right? And they kind of you tell them something and they go, yes sir, yes sir, yes ma'am, and so on.
Yeah.
And I like to say we have a no sir culture, right? Because you don't want somebody, I'll tell people I'll get more mad at you if you do what I say than what you think you should have done because it was right, right? Because sometimes the person might know more about a particular customer or a particular situation. And just because someone else is senior doesn't automatically mean that everything they're saying is right. Right. And when you're excessively deferential and excessively respectful, like you have to be in school with your professors, but that doesn't work in the workplace.
Yeah.
If you're, if you do that to an extreme, then basically you're not thinking, you're not, contributing. You're just sort of a foot soldier who's executing, and so on. So I think, it's really important for people to think independently and do what's the right thing is and challenge other people, irrespective of the seniority. And because that's how best ideas sort of come up, right? And then, just being collaborative, being very customer centric,
Yeah.
right? Ultimately, the customer reality is the only true reality.
Yeah.
Right. Even if, the founder or the CEO says, okay, let's do this, but if the customer disagrees, I mean, who's the real boss, right? Really, the customer is the real boss, because they will, they decide who to pay and what products they like and so on. So kind of, you need that sort of culture as well. Now, of course, the customer will never be able to tell you what the version 1 of a product has to be. So you have to decide and say, okay, we'll build this and take it to them, but then they give you feedback. I like it, I don't like, can you tweak this, can you modify it, and so on, right? So I think I think these are some of the cultural attributes that are essential in an innovative organization, right? Now, this may change a little bit where once you figured out what you want to do, and then you're just in a scale phase, and a lot of other things like reliability and robustness, and sort of don't break things, and sort of attention to detail and things like that also become parts of the culture, right? And that has to be like that. And sometimes companies are in different phases where, some part of the business, like when we look at it, there's the Horizon 1 stuff, as we call it, which has to be very rock solid and stable and reliable, and you don't mess with it, and you don't want to be very entrepreneurial. You can't keep tinkering with a stable, reliable, high scale, high performance platform. But all your Horizon 2 and 3 activities, right? The innovative stuff, the forward looking stuff that you're betting on a 3 or 5 year horizon, all that stuff, that team has to have sort of be very nimble and entrepreneurial. So sometimes you have to be careful. It's a combination of, different things. Different teams itself may have slightly different culture, but the common theme is certainly, being apolitical, collaborative, sort of doing the right thing, challenging each other, finding the best idea, being customer centric. I think that always works.
Absolutely. Phenomenal pointers, all of them. And I think the common theme there is the entrepreneurial culture. If you can build a team full of entrepreneurs, I think most other things get taken care of. And Gupshup is a wonderful example of that. Great. I think this has been wonderful. And as we wind down the conversation, I want to take a couple of last questions and maybe focus on your founder persona, and especially understand more about the depth experiences you've had, right? So first up there is, Beerud, given that you've seen so much in life, right, how do you now make decisions? And this means, just taking this interview, for instance, to taking an important meeting, to taking out time for yourself and bracketing everything, be it the small ones, the large ones, the personal ones, the professional ones. What is your decision making framework and prioritization framework? I think that would be very, very fascinating to hear.
Well, I guess in general, try to get as much data as you can, but beyond a certain point, I mean, really, you have to go with your gut, and your gut is really just a way of describing your collective sum of experiences, right? And sort of what works, what doesn't, and what might work, and so on, right? So it's really that, because a lot of decision making happens with uncertainty, and you can't be paralyzed with that uncertainty, right? You're better off making a decision and having it be wrong and course correcting later, rather than sort of being paralyzed, or sometimes just being open, saying, look, I'm going to try it. We're going to do an A/B test, right? Try this and try that, and once we get some data, then we pick one over the other, and so on. So I think where you really don't know and you can afford to do a couple of experiments, you do it. When it's decision about people and recruiting and so on, it's important to also look at, it's not just the resume, but also the attributes. Are they collaborative? Are they, will they be able to fit into the culture that we've defined? You don't want jerks that are really smart, right? Because they could be smart, but they might not be fit into the culture.
Right.
So I think maybe another thing is, you leave aside a lot of think time, personal time, right? So I try not to, literally get involved in every little thing that I can, because I think sometimes it requires you to reflect and think about what are you missing out on, what are you not doing, because usually it's the big things that you miss that kill you, not the lots of little things, that kind of thing. So I think it's really, basically it's your experience, and you kind of leverage that to sort of make decisions. Yeah.
I know that's phenomenal to hear. But, interestingly, if there is one downside of experience, it's about, whether or not you challenge your own assumptions. And, Adam Grant's written this book called Think Again. So if you have any views on how do you perhaps rethink your own thoughts, and if there's anything at all that you systematically do to perhaps, rethink the assumptions that you might have, rethink the longer term horizon or the plans that are happening in shape. Because as you rightly mentioned, so much of the founder job is looking at the macro vision, looking at the longer term horizon, looking at the years, decades, if not the next quarter, right? So it'll be very interesting to hear what you think of this.
Well, I think, if if a person says I'm very experienced and therefore I know everything, I think that leads to, sort of arrogance and loss of intellectual humility, and can lead to a lot of problems. And that's exactly what that book is sort of saying.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you say, like the saying goes, right, that the more I learn, the more I realize that the less I know. Right. And that sort of forces you to stay, maintain intellectual humility. Then actually that experience is very valuable, because he's saying, there's no guarantee, there's no certainty, but here are things or principles that have worked, and they're just that, right? They're not, they're not an assertion. Don't mistake yourself to be an expert. You just have, just a better set of experiences, or you're leveraging your experience where relevant, without over relying on them and saying, arrogantly claiming it. So I think if that happens, then it can be a great sort of leveler, right? So you kind of have to be, it gets back to that founder psychology. You can't take yourself too seriously. You can't think of yourself, sort of suffer from God complex or anything like that. You can't, you don't want everybody around you saying, yes, sir, because that's a recipe for disaster. You want everybody around you challenging you, and that's hard to do, by the way, because people, they may say it, but it's not a fun experience, I can tell you. When there's oftentimes people engage you in debates or say, oh no, I don't agree with it, and that just means you have to work harder to convince them, and so on. But I think that's how good ideas come about. So I think it's sort of you have to, the experienced person has to consciously say that, I just have a bigger toolkit, but that's not a guaranteed path to success. And otherwise you won't be having so many 20 and 30-year-old successful founders, right? I mean, if experience is everything, because sometimes, by the way, all that baggage you've accumulated is what holds you back, right? You're saying, no, this is how it's always been, so I can't change it. And while somebody who has no experience also has no baggage, and can sort of say, okay, I'm going to just disrupt the whole thing. Why can't we do it this way? And they actually discovered that, oh, you can. Right. So absolutely, I agree with you. I think experience in a way can be a disservice unless you sort of, just think of it as a useful tool, but not much more than that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It is a double-edged sword, but as you mentioned, intellectual honesty is so relevant there, and you just have to maintain that balance, which is something evidently visible by your words. I think for the second last question, Beerud, and this is a fascinating one, personally something that I'm really curious about, but given your entrepreneurial pathway or your career pathway, right? You started as a great person in academics who was doing something in computers, to Wall Street, to then starting a company, which has now gone gone on to become a public one, and then starting a second one, which is now also disrupting a completely a different type of technology, right? What I'm trying to understand here is what keeps you still going, right? I'm sure that there's so much to still do with Gupshup, and the vision is really large, and you're still scratching the surface, and we're going to see a lot of accolades come there. But what is it on a day-to-day that keeps you still at it? What does the entrepreneurial love look like for you? If you can just put it out in words for us, I think there'll be so much to learn from, especially all the youngsters listening in.
You know, I mean, I love what I do because, you know, where else can you get an opportunity to do something or build something that can impact millions of lives, right? That can really touch lots of users and make their lives better. So it's sort of massive and disproportionate impact. It is also, you know, entrepreneurship is also sort of one of the best sort of prosperity generating machines in society, right? Whether it's value for customers, whether it's wealth for employees and investors, or whether it's sort of creating this cycle of the next generation of entrepreneurs, right? Because, by the way, a lot of people who've left Gupshup have gone on to start companies, and I expect even many more so. Why? Because they built that experience and that confidence at Gupshup, which sort of helps them. And frankly, you know, in democratic societies, right, sort of innovation, creation, wealth generation is not done by governments. It's done by sort of private individuals, essentially entrepreneurs. And you know, if you can do that, I mean, there's nothing like it. I think it's easily the most impactful, you know, perhaps the most noble in that sense profession. I mean, and it's so much fun. I mean, it's sort of intellectually stimulating. It's among the hardest thing to do. It's really complex to figure out and make it all work, right? So what else is there to do? I mean, you know, at least for me, from my point of view, it's a lot of fun. It's stimulating. It's very gratifying, and yeah, it's you know, also lucrative as well. So no matter which of these motivations drives people, I think there's you know, and in some sense, it's a combination of all of that together. So you love it. Now, to be fair, it's also excruciatingly painful, extremely challenging. The roller coaster ride and the paranoia and the stress levels, you know, can also be very high. So you kind of have to take the good with the bad, right? And you kind of have to say, yes, so when I say this, that I love this journey, I love the good and the bad, right? Because even at Gupshup, we had a 10-year journey with no investors and no funding. And, you know, a lot of people would have said, oh, wait a minute, that's not the part of the journey that I like, right? I just like the good part when there's a lot of funding and a lot of success. And it's like, no, you can't just have the good parts. You sort of have to, you know, you have to love it enough to say, okay, even the bad parts, you have to be, in that sense, optimistic. You have to be, you know, willing to keep tinkering and pivoting, and, you know, until sort of the next thing comes through and that works, and so on, right? So you know, success is a lot of preparation, where preparation meets opportunity, right? I mean, a little bit of luck is also required for these to happen. Yeah, but for me, I mean, I just love every aspect of it. It's just so creative. I mean, you're always, you know, building, creating, tinkering, and I think it really is a very transformative force in society.
Absolutely. No, I mean, your words are a testament to the passion with which you are building. And as you mentioned, I think you have to accept the good and the bad, and you have to really love it to be able to embrace the journey, such that the journey matters more than the end pathway, which can be different for multiple entrepreneurs. That's subjective. I'm guessing success is only as, you know, how you define it to be. But great to see that you have to accept it. And therein lies my last question. Lastly, this has been wonderful, and I could only thank you so so much for a wonderful conversation. But as we end on a very abstract note, and picking up from what you mentioned, one common theme I've also observed across whenever you've spoken is a steady state, right? A steady state across the good and the bad, across the highs and the lows. Even at the funding announcements, it's not been that, a unicorn status or a profitable unicorn and other things like that are milestones that matter. It's about embracing that journey, especially given that you've been through so many cycles. So what do you have to say about that steady state, and how do you think a lot of us who may not realize this and are chasing, let's say, final outcomes or milestones which may not essentially make sense in the journey perspective, how can we take use from it? I think that would be a long-winded abstract into a wonderful conversation.
Well, I don't know if there is a steady state. It's all unsteady. It's all uncertain. It's all, a roller coaster. There's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
And, the moment you reach some equilibrium point or some steadiness of some kind, something else changes. Maybe the technology changes, maybe some competitor changes, the regulations change, or something or the other, happens and such. So I think maybe, so the steadiness is not in the day to day. I think the steadiness probably is in your own mind, which is to say, okay, I love this process of, creation. I love this journey, and there will be inevitable challenges, and we'll overcome them. We'll figure a way out through all of them. And that, maybe what the steady thing here is that can-do attitude, saying, okay, it's hard, but we'll figure it out. We can, we'll try. We'll keep doing it, and and sort of enjoy the process, whichever way it goes. In terms of even if the outcome is bad today, it might improve tomorrow. I think, or rather, figure out how it will, right? Not just by sitting passively, but think about what you can do differently, what you can do better, and that optimism, even in the when you're suffering from the depths of despair. You just have to have that inherent positive attitude, right? I don't mean irrational optimism, right? You have to be somewhat realistic, but you're still positive, saying, yeah, okay, we lost today, but we can come back and win tomorrow, and we'll figure out a way, we'll do something different, and so on. So really, that's the steady state, and and that's very infectious, because in general, you talk to entrepreneurs, there's a there's a willingness to, like, there's no problem that you can't find a solution for. Okay, let's think about it. Let's sort it through. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? And so on. And maybe that's the steady state, and that's a point at which you get peace, where you don't tie your ego into your valuation necessarily, right? I mean, of course, it's a way to keep score, and it's important, right? But there's something bigger going on. How do you I would say focus on the value, not on the valuation, right? What value are you building in the business? Are you building a better product? Are you getting customers? Do they love you? Do you have a good team? Is that growing, and so on? If that happens, valuation will take care of itself. The ups and downs will sort of sort themselves out. But you continue to sort of just constantly think about how to build value while minimizing risk, and so on. I guess that's the closest to some kind of steady state I can think of.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's wonderful to hear. I could not have thought of a more brilliant end to what has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Beerud, for your time. I certainly loved the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. These are going to be amazingly useful for everyone listening in, and thanks again for being on the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I hope it was useful to all the budding entrepreneurs out there. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.